It begins quietly on a dusty road under the vast, open sky of the American West. Here, where sovereign tribal lands often meet international borders, a new and unsettling chapter is unfolding for America's first peoples. Members of Native American tribes, citizens of the United States by birthright for over a century, find themselves navigating a landscape of suspicion. A routine drive to a neighboring town or a simple visit to family can now be interrupted by the sudden appearance of federal agents. They are asked for papers, questioned about their citizenship, and made to feel like strangers in their own ancestral homelands. This is the stark reality in 2025, a direct consequence of intensified immigration enforcement that casts a wide and often indiscriminate net. This heightened scrutiny is not a random occurrence. It is the result of broad policy shifts that have empowered federal agencies to patrol and question with greater authority, particularly near the US borders with Canada and Mexico. For the tribes whose lands straddle these very lines, such as the Tohono O'odham in Arizona or the Chippewa Cree in Montana, the border is not just a political demarcation, but a part of their daily existence. The new enforcement measures have transformed these familiar territories into zones of tension. The very act of living, of moving freely within the lands their ancestors have inhabited for millennia, is now subject to challenge, forcing an entire community to adapt to a climate of unease and apprehension. The stories emerging from these border communities are consistent and deeply troubling. In early 2025, reports from Arizona and New Mexico detailed over a dozen separate incidents where Native Americans were stopped and detained by immigration officials. These are not isolated events, but part of a larger pattern of racial profiling. Law enforcement, tasked with identifying undocumented immigrants, appears to be targeting individuals based on their appearance, conflating Indigenous features with those of foreign nationals. This mistaken identity is more than an inconvenience. It is an affront to their identity and a painful reminder of a long history of being misunderstood and marginalized by the very government sworn to protect their rights as citizens. In response to this growing threat, tribal leaders have been forced to issue warnings to their own people. The chairman of the Chippewa Cree Nation, for example, has publicly advised all tribal members to carry their official tribal identification cards with them at all times. This is a document that proves their membership in a sovereign nation recognized by the US government. Yet for many, this is no longer enough. To avoid confrontation and the risk of wrongful detention, some have taken the extraordinary step of also carrying their US passports. This simple act reveals a profound and disturbing truth. For Native Americans living on their own lands, their citizenship is now something they must be prepared to prove at a moment's notice. The presence of federal law enforcement on reservation lands has become increasingly intrusive, creating an atmosphere of persistent anxiety. It is not just the official uniformed patrols that cause concern. Tribal members report encounters with Border Patrol agents in plain clothes, operating far from the actual border. These agents have been seen at local gas stations and community stores, places that were once safe from federal oversight. Without presenting warrants or clear jurisdiction, they approach residents, asking invasive questions and demanding to see identification. This type of unsanctioned surveillance undermines the authority of tribal governance and instills a sense of being perpetually watched, eroding the community's feeling of security and autonomy within its own territory. This pattern of profiling is particularly pronounced for tribes like the Navajo Nation, whose vast lands span multiple states in the Southwest. A member of the tribe recently shared that his own family members are now frequently stopped by law enforcement and asked to provide proof of their US citizenship. Such encounters are a source of constant stress and humiliation. They reinforce a harmful and inaccurate stereotype that equates brown skin with foreign status. For a people who are the original inhabitants of this continent, being forced to defend their American identity is a bitter irony. It is a daily burden that chips away at their sense of belonging and dredges up historical traumas of displacement and persecution. The legal and psychological implications of these actions are significant. The increased enforcement is seen by many as a direct violation of tribal sovereignty. Reservations are not merely parcels of land. They are self-governing nations with their own laws, police forces, and political structures, established through treaties with the United States government. The arrival of federal agents who operate without coordinating with tribal authorities is viewed as a deep disrespect to these long-standing agreements. It suggests that the federal government sees tribal lands not as sovereign territories to be respected, but as jurisdictions to be policed at will, further straining an already fragile and complicated relationship. In this climate, the simple act of carrying an ID has become a political statement and a necessary tool for survival. The tribal identification card, once a symbol of cultural pride and community membership, has now become a shield against wrongful accusation. The additional burden of carrying a passport, a document typically reserved for international travel while moving within one's own country, speaks volumes about the challenges Native Americans face. It is a tangible symbol of their precarious position, caught between their sovereign identity as members of a tribal nation and the constant need to validate their citizenship to the federal government. This is the heavy price of policies enacted hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C. To understand the current administration's policies toward Native Americans, one must look back to a long and contentious history rooted in economic competition. The conflict between Donald Trump and tribal nations did not begin with his presidency. It ignited in the 1990s over the burgeoning casino industry. As an established casino magnate in Atlantic City, Trump saw the rapid rise of tax-exempt tribal gaming operations as a direct and existential threat to his business empire. These new casinos, authorized by the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act of 1988, were flourishing, and he viewed their success not as a story of indigenous self-determination, but as a source of unfair competition that was cutting into his profits. Driven by these business concerns, he launched a multi-pronged assault against tribal gaming. He filed lawsuits against the federal government, arguing that the tax-exempt status of tribal casinos gave them an unjust advantage and violated principles of fair competition. When these legal challenges failed in court, he shifted his strategy to the political arena, lobbying members of Congress to change the laws that enabled tribal success. During a 1993 congressional hearing, he made inflammatory and baseless accusations, suggesting that tribal casinos were rife with organized crime, and even questioning the authenticity of the tribal members themselves, remarking that they don't look like Indians to me. The campaign against tribal sovereignty was not limited to courtrooms and congressional chambers. Trump invested over $1 million in a series of aggressive and misleading attack ads. These advertisements were designed to stoke public fear and prejudice, painting a dark picture of tribal gaming that was far removed from reality. The ads aimed to undermine public support for Indigenous enterprise and create a narrative that portrayed the tribes as corrupt and undeserving of their economic success. This calculated smear campaign revealed a willingness to use divisive rhetoric to protect his own financial interests, setting a precedent for the confrontational relationship that would continue for decades to come. In a remarkable turn of events, Trump would later attempt to profit from the very industry he had so vehemently attacked. In the early 2000s, he partnered with the 29 Palms Band of Mission Indians in California, rebranding their casino with his name. However, the partnership was short-lived. The tribe eventually bought out his multi-million-dollar management contract and removed the Trump brand from their establishment. This episode serves as a powerful illustration of the complex and often contradictory nature of his engagement with tribal nations. A relationship defined first by opposition, then by opportunism, and ultimately by a fundamental clash of interests and values. The historical conflict over casinos has evolved into a broader assault on the very foundations of Native American sovereignty under the Trump administration. The policies enacted and the rhetoric employed are seen by many tribal leaders as a systematic effort to dismantle the treaties and federal laws that have long guaranteed Indigenous rights to land, healthcare and self-governance. These are not merely administrative changes. They represent a fundamental challenge to the unique political status of tribal nations. Central to this is the trust responsibility of the federal government, a moral and legal obligation to uphold its treaty promises, which now appears to be in jeopardy. One of the most alarming developments came just 2 months into President Trump's second term. In a move that sent shockwaves through Indian country, he publicly questioned the basis of Native American birthright citizenship. This right was formally granted by the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, but Trump argued that the allegiance tribal members hold to their own sovereign nations made them somehow less American. This statement was not just a historical inaccuracy, it was a direct attack on the dual identity that Native Americans have held for a century. It sought to create a false choice between being a member of a tribe and being a citizen of the United States, threatening to undo decades of legal and social progress. Beyond the rhetoric, the administration has taken concrete steps to weaken federal support systems that are vital for tribal communities. Sweeping budget cuts have been implemented across various federal agencies, disproportionately affecting programs designed to serve Native Americans. Funding for climate initiatives that help tribes protect sacred lands and manage natural resources has been slashed. Investments in critical infrastructure, such as roads, housing and sanitation systems on reservations, have been reduced. These cuts are not just numbers on a balance sheet, they have real-world consequences, hindering the ability of tribes to provide for the well-being of their people and maintain a basic quality of life. Perhaps one of the most culturally devastating policies has been the declaration of English as the only official language of the United States. This move poses a direct threat to the survival of the more than 175 indigenous languages that are still spoken today. Many of these languages are critically endangered, with only a handful of fluent elderly speakers remaining. Federal funding for language immersion schools and preservation programs is essential to their survival. Without this support, linguists predict that most of these languages could vanish within a generation. For communities like the Chippewa Cree, who are fighting to save their language from extinction, this policy feels like a final, crushing blow in a long history of forced assimilation. To witness the tangible effects of these federal policies, we need only look to the Rocky Boys Indian Reservation in rural Montana. This is the home of the Chippewa Cree Nation, a community of approximately 4,500 people living on a territory larger than Washington, D.C. Situated in a remote, windswept landscape near the US-Canadian border, the reservation is a world away from the centers of political power. Here, life is shaped by the rhythms of the land, the strength of family ties, and a daily struggle against economic hardship. The community's primary sources of income are agriculture, livestock ranching, and a heavy reliance on federal programs, the very programs now facing an uncertain future. The economic reality for the Chippewa Cree is stark. For years, the unemployment rate on the reservation has soared above 60%, a figure that, well, reflects a profound lack of local job opportunities. There's only one small grocery store to serve the entire population, forcing most residents to undertake long and costly journeys to off-reservation towns for basic supplies and services. This economic isolation just compounds the challenges of daily life, making it difficult for families to make ends meet. The community's resilience is tested every day as they navigate a landscape of scarcity, relying on their ingenuity and mutual support to overcome the systemic obstacles they face. The people of Rocky Boys are deeply connected to their land and their heritage. It is a place where traditions are passed down through generations, and the community comes together for cultural events like powwows and roping competitions. However, the shadow of federal policies looms large over this vibrant culture. The increased border enforcement has brought a new level of anxiety to a community that has long had family and cultural ties across the international line. The threat of being stopped and questioned on their own land has become a part of their existence, a constant reminder of their vulnerable position in the larger political landscape. Despite these immense challenges, the spirit of the Chippewa Cree people remains unbroken. Their identity is not defined by hardship, but by their enduring connection to each other and to their traditional ways of life. They are a proud and sovereign people working tirelessly to build a better future for their children against formidable odds. Their story is a microcosm of the broader Native American experience in the 21st century, a story of perseverance, cultural pride, and an unwavering determination to protect their sovereignty and heritage in the face of external pressures that threaten to undermine their very existence. For the Chippewa Cree Nation, no struggle is more fundamental than the quest for clean, reliable water. For decades, the community has contended with a water supply that is both insufficient and of poor quality, posing a significant risk to public health and hindering any prospect of economic development. The solution, a project fought for over 2 decades, is the construction of a 50-mile pipeline and a state-of-the-art water treatment plant. This monumental infrastructure project is more than just pipes and concrete. It is a lifeline, promising to bring safe drinking water to thousands of homes and to create a foundation for a healthier and more prosperous future. The construction of the pipeline is a source of immense pride and vital employment on the reservation. In a powerful demonstration of self-sufficiency, the project is being built by a crew that is 100% Native American. It provides well-paying jobs in a community where unemployment is rampant, offering skills, stability and a sense of purpose. Every section of pipe laid is a step towards water security and a testament to the tribe's persistence. The project represents a promise fulfilled, a promise from the federal government as part of its trust responsibility to ensure that the basic needs of the Chippewa Cree people are met. It is a symbol of hope slowly taking shape across the rugged Montana landscape. However, this lifeline is now hanging by a thread. The completion of the water project is entirely dependent on continued federal funding, which has become precarious under the current administration's budget cuts. The slashing of funds for tribal infrastructure programs places the entire endeavour at risk. For the Chippewa Cree, the thought of the project being halted before it is finished is devastating. It would mean a return to the uncertainty of the past, where the simple act of turning on a tap is a gamble. It would be a profound betrayal of the trust they have placed in the federal government and a crushing blow to their aspirations for a better quality of life. The uncertainty surrounding the water project encapsulates the broader vulnerability of tribal nations that depend on federal support. The promises enshrined in treaties, which guarantee resources and support in exchange for vast cessions of land, are being threatened by shifting political winds. The struggle for water at Rocky Boys is not just about infrastructure. It is about justice. It is a fight for a basic human right that has been denied for too long. The fate of the pipeline will be a powerful indicator of whether the United States intends to honor its historical commitments to its First Peoples or abandon them to an uncertain future. On the rolling plains of the Rocky Boys Reservation, another vital effort to reclaim a stolen legacy is underway. This is the Buffalo Child Ranch, a program dedicated to reintroducing the American bison, or buffalo, to the land and to the lives of the Chippewa Cree people. The buffalo was once central to the culture, spirituality and survival of Plains tribes, providing everything from food and shelter to tools and clothing. The systematic eradication of the buffalo herds in the 19th century was a deliberate act of war designed to break the spirit of the tribes and force them onto reservations. Reintroducing them is an act of profound cultural and ecological restoration. The program is a cornerstone of the tribe's push for food sovereignty, the right of a people to define their own food and agriculture systems. For generations, native communities have been forced to rely on government-issued commodity foods, which are often processed, unhealthy and culturally inappropriate. This has contributed to staggering rates of diabetes and other diet-related illnesses. By raising their own buffalo, the Chippewa Cree are working to reverse this trend, providing a lean, nutritious and traditional source of protein for their community. The return of the buffalo represents a return to health, a reconnection with ancestral foodways, and a step toward breaking the cycle of dependency. The Buffalo Child Ranch is more than just a food source. It is a living classroom and a cultural touchstone for the next generation. It allows young tribal members to connect with an animal that is deeply embedded in their creation stories, ceremonies and history. It is a way of healing the historical trauma associated with the buffalo's near extermination and restoring a sacred relationship between the people and the animal. The presence of the herd on the land revitalizes the landscape itself, bringing back a piece of the ecosystem that has been missing for over a century. It is a powerful symbol of resilience and renewal. Yet, like the water project, this vital cultural initiative is also at the mercy of federal funding. The program relies on grants that support tribal agriculture and food sovereignty projects, and these funds are at risk due to the administration's sweeping budget cuts. The potential loss of this program would be a devastating setback. It would not only threaten a crucial source of healthy food, but also halt the progress being made in cultural revitalization and ecological healing. The fight to keep the buffalo on the land is a fight for the soul of the community, a struggle to preserve a way of life that is inextricably linked to the fate of this magnificent animal. In the quiet classrooms of the reservation schools, a desperate battle is being waged for the future of the Cree language. For the Chippewa Cree Nation, as for so many Indigenous peoples, language is the very heart of their culture. It is the vessel that carries their stories, their ceremonies, their unique worldview, and their connection to their ancestors. It is not merely a tool for communication, it is the essence of their identity. Yet this precious cultural inheritance is on the verge of extinction. Today, there are only about 80 fluent speakers of the Cree language left within the tribe, most of whom are elders. The clock is ticking. The decline of the language is a direct result of historical government policies aimed at forced assimilation, particularly the brutal legacy of the boarding school era, when native children were punished for speaking their own tongues. The echoes of that trauma are still felt today. The most alarming statistic is that the Chippewa Cree community has not produced a single new fluent speaker in the last 50 years. The chain of transmission from one generation to the next has been broken. Without urgent and intensive intervention, the language and the universe of knowledge it contains could be lost forever within a single generation. The new federal policy declaring English as the only official language of the United States adds another formidable obstacle to this preservation effort. While it may seem like a symbolic gesture, it has tangible consequences. It delegitimizes the efforts of tribes to revitalize their own languages and threatens the federal funding that supports immersion schools and language programs. These programs are the last best hope for creating a new generation of speakers. They provide an environment where children can learn and use the language in a natural, supportive setting. Without this support, the community's fight to save its language becomes immeasurably harder. Despite these overwhelming challenges, the Chippewa Cree people refuse to let their language die. They are fighting back with courage and determination. Language classes are being held in schools and community centres. Elders are being recorded to preserve their knowledge for future generations. There is a growing movement to reclaim the language, driven by a deep understanding that to lose the language is to lose a fundamental part of who they are. This struggle is a testament to their resilience. It is a declaration that their culture is alive and that they will do whatever it takes to ensure its survival for the generations yet to come. In the face of escalating challenges, from heightened surveillance at their own borders to direct threats against their sovereignty, resources and cultural identity, the Native American spirit remains a powerful force of resilience. The policies enacted in Washington may cast a long and ominous shadow, but they do not define the people they affect. Across Indian country, from the deserts of the southwest to the plains of the north, tribal communities are responding not with despair, but with a renewed commitment to the very things that have sustained them for millennia: their traditions, their languages, and their profound sense of community. The story of the Chippewa Cree Nation serves as a powerful testament to this endurance. They face the potential loss of funding for their most critical projects, the water that promises health and the buffalo that represents a return to tradition. Their language hangs by a thread. Yet in the midst of this uncertainty, they continue to build, to teach, and to practice their culture. They draw strength not from government programs, but from within. As one tribal member expressed, their true power lies in their ability to maintain their way of life and hold on to their community, regardless of what is taken from them by external forces. This internal strength is the ultimate form of sovereignty. It is a sovereignty of the spirit, one that cannot be legislated away or erased by a budget cut. It is visible in the shared laughter at a community gathering, in the focused determination of the workers laying the water pipeline, and in the quiet reverence of a child listening to an elder speak the words of their ancestors. It is a resilience born of a shared history of survival against impossible odds. This is the legacy they are determined to pass on to their children, not a legacy of grievance, but one of strength, pride, and an unbreakable connection to who they are. Ultimately, the future of Native American nations will be determined not by the political whims of any single administration, but by the enduring strength of their own communities. The challenges are immense, and the fight for their rights, their resources, and their cultural survival is far from over. But in their unwavering commitment to preserving their languages, revitalizing their traditions, and supporting one another, America's first peoples demonstrate a timeless truth. They show us that a community united by a shared culture, and a deep love for its heritage possesses a power that no government policy can ever truly diminish. Their spirit, like the land they inhabit, endures.